Following the critical success of Super Castlevania IV on the Super Nintendo and its reignition of the Castlevania franchise, Konami made a game that would one day be touted as a classic in the long-running series. This game was Castlevania Dracula X, Rondo of Blood. Released in 1993 for the PC Engine CD, it was originally only made available in Japan, and, much to the dismay of series fans, there it seemed doomed to stay. However, like the mysterious appearance of Dracula's castle, a port of the game did eventually materialize on the SNES in 1995. Sort of. Castlevania Dracula X was met with high anticipation, followed by lukewarm reviews and a mostly disappointed fan base. The reason was simple. This was not a port, but an entirely different game. While the two games share cover art, a similar narrative, gameplay, and more than an occasional sprite, the majority of the SNES game's levels had been radically redesigned, with fewer branching paths, different bosses, only one playable character, and an altered visual style. The SNES version also features a much higher difficulty than its already challenging PC Engine counterpart. Fans of the series that had waited so long for Dracula X Rondo of Blood had felt, at the time of its release, that the Super Nintendo port was a complete letdown, not living up to its obviously superior namesake. Moreover, after the omnidirectional whipping action of Super Castlevania IV, this game went back to the left and right whipping limitations of the original NES games. Another nail in Dracula X's coffin. But, like the Vampire Lord himself, Dracula X refused to stay buried, and despite being seen mostly as a poor substitution of Rondo of Blood, this game has, in the years since its initial release, developed a growing cult following. And with its re-release on Nintendo's Virtual Console in 2014, more people are now venturing into the haunted hallways of this polarizing game of legend. The year is 1792. A century has passed since the legendary hero Simon Belmont vanquished the dreaded Count Dracula, and the Transylvanian people have all but forgotten the horrors that were once visited upon them by the Servants of Darkness. Though, unbeknownst to the world, shadowy figures gather to revive the fallen Dark Lord. Upon his reawakening, Dracula unleashes his minions upon the townsfolk of Transylvania, and even goes so far as to spirit away Annette and her sister Maria Renard in an attempt to draw out the latest Belmont warrior. Annette Renard being, in fact, the girlfriend of one Richter Belmont, heir to the Belmont legacy, and the current wielder of the infamous vampire killer whip. Learning of these foul goings-on, Richter sets out to rescue the sisters and put an end to Dracula's curse once and for all. Or at least until the next Castlevania game. The story of Dracula X is little changed from the Rondo of Blood version, though the narrative is really only conveyed in the manual and an intro text crawl. And while there may be no endgame dialogue to speak of, it's Castlevania, not a JRPG. The story is just context. The gameplay is the statement. But first, let's talk about the art direction. Barring the striking anime-inspired style of Rondo of Blood's characters, this game showcases the large and colorful sprites of enemies and bosses against vivid backgrounds, ranging in tone from subtle dread, to dark and ominous, to absolutely horrifying. The visual elements of the background set pieces are one of the more noticeable changes that were made in the creation of this game, and serve to establish a decidedly different look from the original art found in Rondo of Blood. The new backgrounds looking more in stylistic harmony with the anime design of Richter and the other reused character assets. A good example of this difference is the visual disparity found in the first stage backgrounds. The Rondo of Blood version looking much more angular and, at times, a bit on the 8-bit side with rigid, barely animated fire, while Dracula X on Super Nintendo featured dazzling flame effects and a real sense that the world is burning down around you. I would even go so far as to saying that the SNES version of Level 1 is perhaps one of my favorite Castlevania intro levels ever. Just beautiful. The same is true of several of Dracula X's levels, redesigned with maybe less going on, but with a more coherent and unified art style overall. And while the Gothic-inspired locales of castle towers and damp caves still makes their presence known, it's the stylistic and colorfully animated way that they are presented that lead this game to standing out from previous entries with its impressive-looking art. Taking on its own merit, this game looks amazing even if it is a bit of a departure from the style of previous Castlevanias. But however you feel about the art, Castlevania is, and always has been, a franchise built on a mountain of bones of foolhardy players that thought they were brave enough to challenge Dracula in his horrid domain. So let's get to the goods. The gameplay. As a franchise structured around the idea of ever-increasing challenge and formidable boss encounters, the Castlevania games have always provided a gameplay-centric experience. To overcome the terrors lying in wait in the uppermost towers of Castle Dracula, the would-be vampire hunter needs to handle with both speed and precision, snapping his whip like some kind of monster-slaying surgical instrument. Dracula X attempts to follow in this tradition, and for the most part, it succeeds. Richter moves almost identically to the way Simon Belmont did in the original game, if not a bit slower. His jumps are fairly precise, and he even comes with some new moves, including the ability to jump on and off of stairs, as well as being able to do a backflip by tapping jump twice. The backflip does have some slide at the end, and I personally never tend to use it, but I do see how this quick escape move could be useful in some places. Also returning in this game is the way combat is handled. Left and right whipping may be a step back from the style of combat introduced in Super Castlevania 4, but for fans of the original series it will feel more than a little familiar, as you use the horizontal action of the Vampire Killer Whip to crack open monsters, heart-filled candles, and walls with hidden meat, like an old pro. Two things you won't find, however, are the whip upgrades and sub-weapon upgrades from the original NES games. Speaking of those sub-weapons, the powerful arsenal of the vampire-killing clan makes a return in this installment with some all-too-familiar items. Back are the stopwatch, axe, boomerang cross, holy water, and dagger. For the price of a few of Richter's hearts, you can use these weapons to deal extra damage to the various enemies and bosses of the game. Most sub-weapons cost just 1 heart per use, with the only exceptions being holy water, which takes 3, and the less than stellar stopwatch that takes 5 whole hearts. For a larger amount of your stockpiled hearts, you can activate an item crash. The item crash was introduced in Rondo of Blood and works the same in this game, activating a massive screen nuke with most of the equipped sub-weapons. The cost of the item crash depends on the weapon, with the dagger and axe costing 10 hearts, the cross and that of the questionable stopwatch costing 15, and if you want to make it rain holy water, it'll take 20 hearts. Even if you don't have an equipped sub-weapon, Richter still has an ace up his sleeve with a giant flaming whip he can use for the price of 15 hearts. After you master the basics of how Richter plays, you'll be ready to take on the hordes of darkness on your way to the final showdown with Dracula. Like previous titles, the levels slowly build in complexity with tougher enemies and varying stage hazards. The levels, though gradually increasing in toughness, don't ever really get too hard, and I feel that memorization of stage layouts is much less important in this game than in other Castlevanias. The biggest reason for this is the sparse way that the levels are populated, never having more than a few enemies on screen at once. And while there are more than a few places that have stage obstacles and enemies present simultaneously, the challenge is not so much in surviving, but in doing so with as much health left as possible. A cautious playstyle could see a player get through many of the game's levels in the first try. In my opinion, this is the weakest part of the game's gameplay, as the levels aren't necessarily easy, with taking damage almost guaranteed, but not nearly as difficult as most other Castlevania titles. At least, that is, until it comes time for a boss fight. The boss fights, probably my favorite part of this game, consist of large enemy sprites unleashing hellfire on Richter. No two fights are the same, and each requires a unique battle strategy. No more having one end-all beat-all sub-weapon that'll make a boss easy. Nope, now it comes down more to skill and pattern exploitation. And while the first few boss fights are easy enough, as Richter makes his way closer to the end, the danger becomes substantial, with a high likelihood that you'll be facing the boss with half health. Or less. Even without this last fact, the boss fights in this game were already made more difficult from their PC Engine predecessors. This is especially true of the final boss encounter with Dracula. Set in a room of pillars of variable height, with a teleporting enemy that only opens himself to attack for a couple of seconds at a time, not to mention that falling off the pillars will spell certain doom, this mother of all aggravating fights will push you to your limit. Even calling it hard is a vast understatement, but memorizing the structure of the pillars and the patterns of attack will earn you a shot at fighting Dracula's second form, which is even more nerve-shattering as he flies around launching fireballs and landing only long enough to launch shockwaves at our pillar-hopping hero. Defeating him in this last pitched battle will reward us with an anime-inspired montage that changes depending on whether or not Richter rescued Annette, Maria, both, or neither. Even after the game officially ends, there is some replay value as the branching paths can serve to add a little variety, with new boss fights at the end of the 2 stages, as well as a chance to see the alternate endings. With all that said, I think the gameplay of this title is solid, but Dracula X is far from the best Castlevania game in the series. When compared to Rondo of Blood specifically, this game always seems to come up short in regards to gameplay. except perhaps in the last battle, which was more than a bit easy on the PC Engine game. Though, when taken as its own game, Dracula X is a competent platform game with some good boss fights and enough challenge to satisfy most skilled gamers. Now for the sounds. The score of this title features many great sounding musical tracks, some of which are MIDI-styled versions of the audio tracks from Rondo of Blood. While not having access to the CD quality audio of the PC Engine CD, this game manages to make a concerted effort of bringing some of those songs to life on the SNES. The opening song Opposing Bloodlines, in particular, is one of my favorites. Also, the boss fight music, Dancing in Phantasmic Hell, is a great blood-pumping tune to slay baddies to. As well as series staple Vampire Killer getting another outstanding update. It might not be able to go toe-to-toe fidelity-wise with Rondo of Blood's high-quality musical score, but I think the soundtrack of this game brings a lot of diversity and flavor, and I love the MIDI arrangements and remix versions of established songs. The soundtrack is an absolute joy to listen to, and it still holds up today. And that brings us to the end of our look at Castlevania Dracula X. Is it a great game? Maybe not, but it's not a bad game either. Is it the pinnacle of the 2D Castlevania's whip-wielding vampire-killing formula? No. But it is a solid game, and one that I feel was written off by most people by what it's not for what it is. Simply put, I love this game. It has a story, a past, and in its time has become somewhat infamous. But on its own merit, I firmly believe it deserves the title of Castlevania, and whether you love it or hate it, Dracula X for the SNES has surely earned its rightful place as a game of legend.